I'm here to talk about what makes a great paper, particularly from an editorial perspective, though I do partially think I'm brought out to show that despite tattoos and facial piercings, you can also have a really productive career. So I'm a senior editor at Nature Communications, where I handle manuscripts involving synthetic biology, genome engineering, and various aspects of biotech. I had a very traditional academic career, a PhD, and then 2 quite short postdocs at the University of Sussex, focusing on DNA damage and how you then repair that damage. So what makes a great paper? What do we as editors look for when we're assessing a paper? And how can you use that in your academic career to design papers that really aim for the top level of journals? Nature's mission statement, going all the way back to the beginning in 1869, is to place before the general public the result of scientific discovery and to help scientists to learn about advances in all branches of natural knowledge. And the weird emphasis I've put on certain points will make a lot more sense as we go through these slides. So what is Nature? I'm going to assume everyone in the room has heard about Nature. It is fundamentally a magazine publishing important advances with wide implications, and those advances should be readily apparent to non-specialists. Within the family, in addition to Nature, we have what are the Nature research journals, your Nature Genetics, your Nature Physics, your Nature Materials. These are specialized journals covering a specific discipline, and anything published within these research journals, the importance should be readily apparent to anyone working within that discipline. If you are a physicist, and I'm not a physicist, so I might make up a few terms here, working in thermodynamics, you should be able to pick up a copy of Nature Physics, read something about quantum physics, and go, that's important, and I know why that's important. I work for Nature Communications. Like Nature, we are a broad interest journal covering all areas of the natural sciences. There's a rough hierarchy of journals within the family, with Nature very much putting itself at the very pinnacle. The Nature research journals, then Nature Communications, are recently launched sister journals, Communications Biology, Communications Chemistry, Communications Physics. And at this pyramid, the foundation is Scientific Reports. Very roughly, anything with the word Nature in the title is a highly selective journal. Nature, the Nature research journals, Nature Communications, we tend to have around a 10% acceptance rate. So for every 10 papers that get sent to us, 1 makes it through to publication. Scientific Reports operates a very different editorial model. They're looking for technical accuracy and leave the importance of the paper itself to the scientific community to assess. They have roughly a 65 to 70% acceptance rate. And the communications journals fall somewhere in between. They are looking for an important advance. They're quite selective, but they're not as selective as a Nature-branded journal. So, what actually makes a great paper? And the problem is the secret of a great paper is great research. There's no way around that. We are looking for strong evidence with noteworthy conclusions, and as you'll come to see in the slides, a compelling story, because you are explaining your research and explaining the advance to people who are not necessarily specialists in your field. The importance of building a narrative to convey why what you've done is so important is really paramount. And you need to know your audience. It's no use writing a paper intended for cell biologists if you're pitching it toward a physical sciences community. And paper writing is obviously one part of a broader academic life cycle, which seems to never end. Grant, experiments, papers, publications, which then allow you to propose new ideas, to get new grants, to do new experiments, on and on. So as an editor for a Nature research journal, what am I looking for when a paper lands on my desk? We're interested in the potential breadth of interest of this paper. Would it be interesting to a wide range of scientists? If a paper's coming out in Nature, in theory, anyone from the natural sciences should be able to look at it and understand why that advance is important. If a paper's coming out in Nature Communications, we're quite happy to have really focused conversations with specialized communities, but also people should be able to look at the paper and be like, I understand why that's important. We're looking for a striking conceptual advance over what we previously know, how that advances things forward, and often how we can then take that advance to build on it further. But you could have the broadest interest paper with the most striking advance, and if you don't have strong logical support for your conclusions, it's not going to fly. Your work should inspire further research. That's the life cycle of science. You do work, which then people build upon, which then people build upon and build upon. Depending on the type of article, we could be interested in the resource value. Have you painstakingly assembled a large data set that other researchers can then use for their own work? Have you presented a significant technical breakthrough? You've made something easier to do, cheaper to do, faster to do. Is there a significant public interest in your paper? For example, when the original Zika outbreak happened, research was coming in, it was all very fresh, very new, characterizing a new disease outbreak. Doesn't give you a lot of time to really delve into the specifics of, say, how the virus works or how the epidemiology is occurring, but there is a significant public interest in this research being assessed and being published. So I'm going to give a couple example papers, which I was the handling editor for. I think within the last year, these were probably two of my favorite papers, and sort of hopefully explain how they sort of met the criteria we apply. In this paper, caffeine-inducible gene switches controlling experimental diabetes. The authors of this paper constructed a genetic circuit where, upon exposure to caffeine, it activated expression of a gene which then had roles in regulating blood glucose levels. They put this in a cell. They put the cell in a mouse. The mouse was a mouse model of diabetes. And they showed that if you gave the mouse caffeine after feeding it, it controlled its blood glucose levels better than the control mice. This was really interesting. When this landed on my desk, I got very excited. It's a cool idea at the end of the day. And it's an interesting idea with really interesting implications. The authors talked about the idea that, for example, if you were diabetic and a human version of this has been approved for therapeutic use, could you control your diabetes through lifestyle-compatible mechanisms, such as having an espresso after dinner, as opposed to having to inject yourself with insulin? The paper's not there yet. There's no human work, but it points to where the direction of work should go. The authors, despite the brilliant idea, needed to have really strong evidence and conclusions for their work, and after quite a harsh round of peer review, they did what was necessary to show that these mice were responding to the caffeine, literally to Starbucks coffee, when I looked at the figure, and it was having the intended effect. Another recent one I was really fond of, synthetic cells using a peptide-based reaction compartment. In this work, the authors used a peptide to design a self-contained vesicle in which they put a molecular biology reaction inside. That reaction was actually the production of the peptide which composed the vesicle, allowing the artificial cell to grow and expand, analogous to a natural cell. Quite strong conclusions, quite strong support for the conclusions. Cool idea yet again. I am a painful sucker for cool ideas when they appear in my inbox. And points to where the work then goes next. Can we design artificial or synthetic cells which could self-contain their own reactions for use in biotechnology? What I'm presenting today is a very abridged version of a much more comprehensive and in-depth course, a Nature Masterclass course. We have a few people from Nature Masterclass here. If you have any questions after the talk, could you shout or yay, embarrassing interaction. These masterclasses are 1 to 2 day events delivered by Nature research editors. They are very comprehensive in the topics they cover, from what makes a great paper, through to the editorial process, how do you respond to reviews, what happens after publication. And they are designed for busy researchers, a lot of interaction with the masterclass team to ensure that the course is delivering content specific for the researchers that have commissioned it. If anyone is interested, you can go to masterclasses.nature.com for much more information about these courses. There's an online course available to institutions. If you are interested, recommend this to your institution and have them try a little bit for free. There's some free sample content on there, particularly the focus on peer review. Very useful if you've just got your review reports back from your recent submission and are about to send off an incredibly angry letter about how review number 3 does not understand your research in the slightest and should be stricken from science forever. Not the way to go, and this will tell you why that's not the way to go. You can also visit What Makes a Great Paper, sort of an overview of which I'm giving a sample of here. More information on how a great paper fits into the publication cycle and the greater sort of research cycle. What the essential criteria for a great paper are from a Nature editor perspective, and how we define that perspective, how we define the criteria we're looking for in a really amazing paper. So, what makes an amazing paper? You've got some great research. You think it's really interesting. How do you then build the paper from that great research to convince everyone else it's really interesting? How do you go from start to finish? You need to craft a story. I know a lot of people go into science because, particularly at the sort of undergraduate level, they're like, I never want to do any writing ever again. I hate essays. That's for the English literature humanities students. And what you actually end up doing in science is far more writing than you ever expected, and far more narrative storytelling than you ever expected. Because you need to turn your great research, which you are so familiar with at that point, into a story for somebody else to understand why it's so amazing. And particularly if you're looking for the top tier of journals, you need to do that for somebody who's not coming from the same background as you scientifically. So how do you build this narrative thread? Remember, from the point of view of your reader, the first question they will ask is, why should I care about what you've done? You love your work. Why should they love your work? The introduction introduces what's been done before, gives context to why your work is important, and then what you've set out to achieve and how you've achieved it. Which brings you into the results. You cannot just present a massive table of all your data and go, here. It's amazing, right? No one will look at it. You need to guide your reader through your story, explain how your results build on each other, how they support each other, as you assemble this house of cards is the wrong analogy because they fall down really easily, but self-supporting argument towards the discussion, which fundamentally comes back to the same question the reader's been asking all along: why should I believe you? And at this point, why should I care about what you've done? The discussion gives you the ability to be reflective, to comment on other works and how your work fits into the broader context, and to point out, we've now achieved this, but where do we go from here? What's left to next discover? If you want more information on introductions and building that narrative thread through results to conclusions, go again to the masterclasses.nature.com site. More details there can be found on what needs to be included, and importantly, what should be excluded from each section of a paper, and how you organize these ideas into a coherent narrative. So you've got the broad narrative. You've storyboarded your research. You kind of know how you're getting from point A to point B. How do you grab people's attention to bring them in and actually read your paper? Because you've got to remember, because everyone's busy, and even the best researchers in the world have a really limited attention span, and I sometimes think the best researchers in the world have the worst attention span, having met a couple, of say every 100 people who sees a title of your paper, they're browsing through PubMed or Archive, they're flipping through the Nature contents list. Truth be told, I read the majority of my papers on Twitter because somebody has gone, look at this is neat. Of the 100 people who see your title, 50 might go on and read the abstract. A further 10 might end up reading the actual paper. And so you're aiming to grab people to get to that target audience all the way from going, that's a cool title, oh, that's an interesting abstract, oh, that's a really good paper. I should cite it. And you do that through this very Sesame Street style metric of your writing style needs to be accurate, brief, and clear. Big, fancy, showy-offy words for the sake of big, fancy, showy-offy words tend to just put people off. And your title has to be declarative, engaging, and focused. It is your first shot at getting somebody's attention and bringing them to your manuscript. There are really easy ways to make people skip over your title and never read your paper. Complex compound nouns shut down the human brain. If possible, use the active voice. I was taught initially when I was going through science at school and stuff that it is third person passive, third person passive, third person passive. And the moment I hit actual doing science, they're like active, active, active. Because fundamentally, take ownership of the work you've done. Was the experiment was conducted, or we conducted the following experiment? Avoid acronyms. Nothing stops a person in their tracks trying to read a title more than an acronym they've never encountered before. Don't be too assertive. People reading your paper might be experts in a field, and there is nothing quite like a red flag to a bull as being completely assertive in the title. Avoid asking questions. The whole point of the paper is that you're answering a question. And never use puns. Puns are my #1 pet hate. Fundamentally, you're not as funny as you think you are, and it never translates well into an academic paper. So, I like interactive discussions. Let's have a bit of a go at what makes a great title. Here's an abstract published in Nature Biomedical Engineering. Not being a materials person, I kind of only vaguely understand what it's getting at, but it describes a high molecular weight polymer for controlled drug release that is used in the treatment of rabbit knees to control bacterial infections. Based on sort of what we covered as the do not of title writing, with this abstract, what would be a good title for this paper? We've got a few, and I would like to see by a show of hands if you think these titles are good titles. Can a drug-eluting implant with sustained drug delivery retain mechanical strength? Good title, hands up. Oh. Good title. Do we like this title? Oh, okay. Do we like this title? I see 1, 2. Cool, okay, interesting. I think there's one more. Do we like this title? I saw some hands up there. Okay, you're out of academia. Why are you asking a question when the answer is going to be yes or no? Either way, your paper is the question you're asking and answering. There's no need to put it in the title. That's basically the abstract, shortened down again to an editorial summary. No one's going to see that pop up on their e-talk and be like, yes, I've got 5 minutes to read through all of this. Massive acronym. If you're not an expert in that field, you will take one look and shrug your shoulders and move on. This one I ummed and ahed about when I got these slides, actually, because it's not an awful title, but it's not the best title you could have had. And the final one, I won't even give the time of day. All it's shown is that you know a pun involving rabbits, and your paper involves rabbits. The published title, A Fully Functional Drug-Eluting Joint Implant. It's short, it's to the point, it tells you exactly what you're getting in the paper, and it's intriguing. You want to know more? So you've got the perfect title. Potentially, you've got the perfect abstract first and get the title from that. Potentially, you've got the perfect title, then to get the perfect abstract. There's a slight chicken and the egg scenario about this, which is why normally everyone writes the entire paper first and then goes back and does these things at the very end. The abstract is your second chance to bring people in. They've taken the bait of the title. You now have to use the abstract to reel them in a bit further until they get to the paper itself. And you do that by basically giving them a mini version of that paper. You're going to introduce what's occurring and what the context of the problem is. The gap, the problem, why have you done this research? I mean, that's a really important question, isn't it? You know, somebody gave you money to do this research. Why have they done so? What have you done to address that problem? What was your approach, your results? What did you conclude from your work? And how does this advance over previous work, and what are the implications of that advance? Example, again, material science paper, because they don't want to give me papers I'm familiar with. But as a non-material scientist, I can look at this abstract and kind of understand the importance of this work. These interfaces, coherent twin boundaries, they're significant. Opening sentence states exactly what's happening. However, the problem we have is most of our understanding is fundamentally theoretical. Not quite good if you actually want to use these things in practice. What have the authors done? Well, in this report, they're showing how by experiments and simulations, they have inherent defects in these interfaces. Furthermore, those defects are crucial for understanding how these interfaces deform. But why is that important? Because it offers a view of a structure that is largely different from what's being published in the literature and underscores the importance of understanding these differences for nano-strengthened materials. In one go, we have gone from here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we've done, here's what we know now, and why we go forward. For more information, please go back to the Masterclass website. We have quite a lot of material up there. 15 modules in our scientific writing and publishing online course, covering what makes a good title. We offer easy-to-use abstract templates based on the following model of context, problem, here what we've done, why we've done it, the implications, and how we move forward. And also the red flags to avoid when writing your titles and writing your abstracts. I have seen some truly appalling titles and abstracts working as an editor. Abstracts which were basically as long as the paper itself, and abstracts that went, we did this. So we've got 5-ish minutes?
A bit more?
A bit more?
A couple more minutes. Yeah. But we have time for questions, yes.
Okay, cool, yeah, okay. I was like, I can't keep talking, it literally says Q&A on the board now.
No, there's a couple behind you.
Okay. You don't need to be a native English speaker. I work in a very, very international team, not only in London, where many of my colleagues are from other parts of the world, but also we have offices in New York, Berlin, Shanghai. I'd say probably being a native English speaker puts me in the minority of editors. You have to have a good grasp of the English language, as if you were working in academia and presenting your work to international conferences, but you don't have to be Shakespeare.
Thanks very much. And the next question, you can choose how professionally you'd like to answer that question from T-Rex.
I'll try both. What's the biggest mistake something authors miss made by scientists? A little bit depressingly, it's not doing the literature research before you write your paper. Because we judge papers on a degree of advance and novelty, it can be a little disheartening to get a really exciting paper, come in, reading through it, you're like, oh my God, this sounds so cool. And the moment you turn to the literature, be like, oh, it was done 5 years ago. I think I sent away 3 or 4 papers last week on those grounds. I'm like, this is super great, but it's been done, and how do we go forward with that? The T-shirt was a gift, so I legit have no idea where it came from.
Commiserations, T-Rex. I'm sorry.
It's a velociraptor.
Oh, velociraptor. No, the question is from T-Rex.
Best bit of advice to give to a master's student. If you're interested in a career in editorial, it's get your master's, get your PhD, and then look for editorial jobs. If you're interested in getting your work published, it's the exact same advice that we give to PhD students, to postdocs, to senior lab heads who've attended these Masterclass workshops. The advice doesn't change. You know, you can get surprisingly far in your career and not necessarily know how to write a good paper. The sooner you learn how to write a good paper, probably the easier you'll find your career.
Thank you very much. There's a nice couple of technical questions there. Do you need a summary of the methodology in the abstract?
I mean, is it a methods paper? Sometimes, yes. If you're describing a method, you need to give a sort of brief overview of some of the details of that method. I wouldn't go into the depth of like, we use 6-molar NaCl in the abstract. That's unnecessary. That goes somewhere else in the paper. Conversely, if your paper is a out-and-out scientific advance, you're not doing any method development, then no. You can say, we use this method to discover the following.
Thank you. And I guess that answers the other question, which is what do you look for in nature methods, right?
Well, that's interesting. Given that I don't work for nature methods, I have no idea what they look for. I mean, one of the really key things is journals are independent within the nature family. So though I work very closely with my colleagues at Nature Methods, their editorial decisions are completely independent from my editorial decisions. There are areas we overlap. I handle quite a lot of methods papers. So when we get together, whether formally or informally, to talk about work, I gain an understanding of what they're looking for. And typically, they're looking for a method which is an advance over existing methods, allows us to do something that's not been done before, or do it substantially better.
Thank you. Oh, we've got a question with an upvote, so I'm going to prioritise that one. What are your thoughts on publishing negative results? It's good, isn't it? It has upvotes.
Wow, yeah. Facebook
Slido.com, NJC18. What are your thoughts on publishing negative results?
There's a place for them. There's a place to show that things are as we assumed, or like things you've ruled out a hypothesis. It can be more difficult to publish negative results because the advance angle is necessarily different than if you're publishing positive results, but there's a role for negative results within a manuscript. I've seen manuscripts where authors have steadily ruled out possibilities to then come to the final conclusion, which actually does help us better understand the system.
Thank you. I think we have time for those 3 questions left on the board, and then after we might have to move on. I like how people are I need to read this out. I like how people are second-guessing their grammar when they're talking to an editor.
Which is hilarious, because my grammar is awful.
How much of an expert do you have to be in a field, brackets, fields, to be an editor in Nature?
So you don't have to be the expert. And we are very clear that you cannot be the expert in a field, because the expert in a field is working in academia, being the expert in a field. The reviewers we recruit are experts in fields, and we rely on their advice to help guide our decisions. But as an editor, you have to know a field fairly well to be able to make logical, understandable, well-informed decisions about the papers you're handling. And you also have to know broader fields relatively well as well, because you will end up handling stuff that is not what you worked on in your PhD or your postdoc. When I started, I came from a postdoctoral background in very traditional molecular biology. That was an aspect of my editorial remit. Through time, I also ended up handling areas of molecular biology I hadn't handled in the lab. Ended up in statistical genetics at some point, which was a fascinating 6-week crash course to get my head around that. There is very much a degree editorially that you can take on things you might be unfamiliar with, process the information, put it in context, and be able to give well-reasoned responses to the questions you're getting.
Thank you. We don't have a lot of time, but I wonder if you can give a quick answer to choosing the reviewers for a paper. How does Nature Communications choose its reviewers?
You as the editor do that. You know a field. You know who's publishing in that field. You know what they work on. You do a literature search. You see who's been doing similar work. The authors will often suggest reviewers, which you can take into consideration. They will often exclude reviewers, and we honor that completely.
Thank you very much. And last question, as an editor, do you get to do any writing yourself?
It varies. So I quite enjoy writing. So what I've done is I often write what are called research highlights for one of our reviews journals on recent papers that have come out. If you don't want to do that, your sort of editorial writing will often be the reports you're writing to your colleagues, your letters to authors. One of the really nice things about working for the Nature Research family is there's such a breadth of journals who are always looking for commissioned content that you can gain experience writing types of articles that you might not necessarily do specifically in your day-to-day job. And this just refers to Nature Communications, where we have less of a editor-driven front half and opinion section, whereas the other journals, the editors are often writing editorials and research highlights and things like that. Though as a journal, we are broadening out quite significantly in those areas.
Thank you. And people can talk to you just outside if they want to, right?
Yes, once I grab a glass of water.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.